intelligencesquared.com.
Well, my name is Jeremy O'Grady. I'm from Intelligence Squared. I'm here interviewing the renowned neuroscientist and scourge of religious people everywhere, Sam Harris, who's in London this week to tell us more about his book, The Moral Landscape, and to be challenged by Canon Giles Fraser. But right now, Sam, I'd like to talk to you about an event that has been troubling our journalists over the last few weeks, which is, and troubling you, I suspect. Martin Rees, the eminent scientist, has accepted an award from the Templeton Foundation. Yeah. Perhaps you could begin by telling us your attitudes to the Templeton Foundation and perhaps cue us in on what kind of an organization you construe it to be.
Templeton really is a fantastically well-endowed foundation purpose toward blurring the line between real science and religion, and they've become more and more artful about doing that. Part of their success has been just the sheer brute force enabled by having so much money. I mean, what we have is the juxtaposition of a multi-billion-dollar endowment and the relative poverty of science. The science is just cash starved, and so you create an incentive for otherwise secular, even atheist scientists to rationalize collaborating with this organization because they can fund research to a remarkable degree. And they give $10 million grants to researchers. So it's problematic in that regard, but I think they have a conscious
program.
They have a conscious program of ultimately exonerating Christian superstition in the light of science. Now, maybe that's changing. Maybe there are new people at Templeton who are not happy with that original mandate, but that was their original mandate. And if you look at their website over the years, if you go into the Internet Archive, you can see how they've finessed the mission statement and kind of buried the dogmatism. But unless they have,
those are strong verbs, but might a less irate critic of Templeton say, well, they're going in the right direction. As I recall, their first awards were to people like Mother Teresa and so on. Now they're moving towards the Martin Reeses of this world. Why don't you applaud that development?
Well, because to my eye, they're not giving Martin Rees an award for anything he's done that accomplishes their mandate. He is not an especially religious person who has managed to show through science that there are spiritual principles at work in the universe. Or he's an especially polite scientist who hasn't wanted to spell out the zero-sum conflict between the scientific worldview and the Iron Age philosophy that is.
Well, two questions there. One, that presupposes that this is a necessary conflict. And I'm not sure, does Martin Rees actually feel that there is a necessary conflict?
No, well, he apparently doesn't, and that I would certainly take issue with, and obviously my work has been to try to spell out that conflict, among other conflicts. I don't think this is something that, and I don't know Martin. I admire his science, and I've read one of his books, which I really enjoyed. So I have nothing but, by default, I have nothing but admiration for him, except for the fact that he's clearly far too polite for his own good, or for the good of having an honest conversation about the ways in which religion and science collide, and it is simply a fact that all religion, most of the time, makes claims about the way the world is, and these claims are, in principle, proto-scientific claims. If you believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, you believe in a specific claim about history and biology. And
all right, but let's take the more. I mean, it strikes me, having observed religions, and particularly the Anglican religion over the time, that its claims actually are getting more and more dilute, and less specific to things like the virgin birth and things, and much more to do with the idea that there may be an all-powerful, kind redeemer figure presiding over all of this.
Well, that one thing to note is that's far less true in the United States, where the Templeton is
okay.
very active.
Let's locate it over here for a bit.
Yeah.
Isn't it the case that the more Templeton's audience, whoever they may be, are persuaded to read the likes of Martin Rees, isn't it the case that the chances of their actually becoming more reasonable human beings under your lights are actually promoted rather than hurt by what Templeton is doing?
To take a sort of larger construal of that question, religious moderation is certainly better than religious fundamentalism, in my view. And so the moderation of dogmatism is good. You could argue that it's good and it's moving in the right direction. The problem, however, is that religious moderation is also tantamount to the claim that though we can relax our adherence to the letter of the text, and though we can relax our adherence to making outrageous truth claims about the way the universe is, religion is, in some sense, necessary. And what that prevents, in my mind, is two things that are crucial, I think, to the flourishing of humanity at this moment. It prevents us from really criticizing religious dogmatism and locating the problem that is religious dogmatism across the board. So it's the religious moderates who will say, oh, you don't understand, Islam is a religion of peace, for instance. And so you have to fight through a wall of that euphemism to get to the ground truth that, no, Islam's not a religion of peace, and it's a problem.
But I don't understand why you don't accept a step process here.
But let me just add one more piece. It prevents our creating a truly rational discussion about ethics and spirituality and just the nature of human experience in the 21st century in terms that aren't an affront to all that we've come to understand about the universe. So the fact that Christians are still being Christians, however tepid, and insisting upon the sanctity of that, and insisting upon its necessary durability, that sort of sectarian ideology, and that Muslims do the same and Buddhists do the same. We have this world that's sort of shattered by these competing belief systems, however dilute. But it prevents us from saying, listen, we just have there's a deeper principle at work. Human beings have certain kinds of experiences. Human beings have experiences of love and compassion and forgiveness and self-transcendence. Let's understand that fully in the context of 21st century rational discourse and jettison all the Iron Age barbarism.
Isn't part of the rational discourse to recognize the difficulty of changing people's minds? And isn't it therefore quite a good first step to change people's minds by encouraging them to read the likes of Martin Rees? I noticed that another recipient of the Templeton Award was Jesse Baring, the author of The God Instinct, whose work as a non-believer was to see why it is that believers believe. Now, these kind of things which you are introducing, the kind of people whose mind, unless you want to just go on preaching to the converted, if you're going to do the converting, isn't it a good idea to start by breaking down, as the Templeton perhaps advertently or inadvertently is doing, by breaking down the resistance to actually contemplating these things?
Well, I think,
things you're talking about.
I think there's room for different voices. I'm not arguing that everyone with a shred of self-respect has to make the noises I make, or Richard Dawkins makes, or Hitchens makes.
That's generous of you.
I recognize that there are certain contexts in which it's profoundly unhelpful and in fact suicidal to make those noises. I can't go to Mecca and give a public talk of the sort I'm about to give here. So
can I put to you that it's profoundly irrational? Perhaps profound is too strong, but isn't it rather irrational to make, as Dawkins and Harry Kroto and other eminent Nobel Prize-winning scientists, and possibly yourself, isn't it rather a mistake to flam up what Martin Rees has done and actually draw attention to all of this? I mean, aren't you doing the opposite? Isn't that irrational? And insofar as bad consequences come from that, almost immoral to be doing that.
What do you mean by flam up?
I mean, all the attention. If he'd just been given this award, at least as far as Britain is concerned, nobody much would have heard about this. The reason we've heard about it is because Harry Croto and Richard Dawkins, and they quote, they talk him a compliant quisling, says one, and suffering from intellectual schizophrenia, says the other. Now that, of course, if you're rational and look at the way human relationships work, especially the relationships with journalists, is to say, right, we've got a subject here. Otherwise, the guy gets his award. A few people in the Templeton organization possibly might become slightly less fanatical Christian if they read this, so that's a positive. But otherwise, everybody keeps quiet about it. As it is, the whole thing is now flammed up in such a way that you're actually...
Well, you notice I haven't done that. In fact, you asked me about it. This is not something that's on my agenda to talk about. But I think it is, listen, if you look closely enough at the problem, it is intellectually dishonest to say that there's no conflict between religion and science. I mean, they are, unless you get the most denuded, propositionless form of religion, which just amounts to liking certain architecture, art, and music. The moment you get people believing claims about what happens after death, what happened in the past, how human beings are connected with energy, whatever it is, whether it's New Age or Iron Age, people are making claims about the way the world is, and they're making them for bad reasons. And faith is the name we put to this disposition between people to give one another permission to believe things strongly without evidence. And it is the antithesis of the scientific attitude. And it's not to say scientists can't be caught being dogmatists in their own right, but by definition, we're trying to jettison that in science. I mean, that is what science is, to be scrupulously honest in that regard. So we have the intellectual high ground, and what someone like Martin Rees appears to do by refusing to call a spade is to muddy the distinction, which is a truly important distinction. We've just now climbed out from under the shadow of centuries in which it was dangerous to reason honestly about the nature of the world, and it's still dangerous.
Can I have a last pop at the question of the recognition of human irrationality? The point is there are a lot of by your own standards, at any rate, you'd be the first to agree. There are a lot, in fact, the majority of humankind, given that they are religious in some way or another, are acting irrationally. Now, whatever the reasons for that, you would presumably concur that they are. And you would also presumably concur that it's going to be a hard task making them change their mind, however it's done, and you seem to think that argument can play its part, rather than...
I have evidence for that, in fact. I mean, you have to imagine what it's like to be me or Richard Dawkins on the receiving end of tens of thousands of emails from people who used to be not only religious but fundamentalists, and it wasn't many of them actually have come to their senses on the basis of reading our books or seeing debates. I mean, more often it's some other encounter with too much reason, but people have reasoned their way out of the religion of their parents, and
they have. I mean, I can't obviously know about the content of your emails, but my own limited experience of the way humans behave very often when confronted by something which actually hurts their belief is to become even more inflammatory very often. And so the last question, we don't have much more time, but it's a strong word and in a way an odd word to use, dishonesty in this case, when applied to, say, Martin Rees and inferentially Templeton. I mean, it may be misguided, but you could say, would you not agree that it would be an honest, if misguided, strategy of, say, Martin Rees to say, listen, I want to reach these people, I understand why the way they think they do, and if I'm ever to change their mind, in my view, despite the fact that I might get a few complimentary emails from erstwhile believers, but for the bulk of them, my suspicion is that I'll best change their mind by saying, well, hang on, let's just get rid of a few problems, just see, and present his own worldview as something that is not necessarily existentially destructive of everything that the people he's trying to convert believe.
Well, I do not doubt that he sincerely doesn't see the problem. That doesn't change the fact.
So that dishonesty was perhaps the wrong word to apply.
I think there's. I wasn't applying intellectual dishonesty personally to him, or knowing fraud, but it's a failure to see a contradiction. And I want to take the center of your question. You just imagine mapping everything you just said onto witchcraft. I mean, no one is worrying that we should allied the conflict between science and witchcraft. No, because witchcraft is not very well subscribed in the West, but witchcraft is pandemic in Africa, say. Nobody looks at the fact that witchcraft is causing immense suffering in Africa. I mean, you've got people hunting albinos because they think their body parts have magical properties. Nobody looks at that and says, well, people are irrational. It's always going to be something. We're never going to get over this. I mean, we can see how the fact that we have breakthroughs in medicine has eroded our propensity to think this way, among other things. Now, that same process, that same kind of zero-sum conflict between reason and evidence-based thinking and the magic of our ignorant ancestors, that is the same collision I see between science and religion. That's not to say that there aren't interesting things in religion that we want to conserve in scientific language, like positive attitudes and self-transcendence and love. I mean, if you can love your neighbor as yourself, I want to know that as much as anybody. If you can become like Jesus, I want to know about that possibility. But we have to talk about that in terms that don't entail lying to children or to ourselves about the nature of reality. And that's the thing that gets fudged with this Templeton business. And if they were doing it with witchcraft, it would be immediately recognized as an obscenity, an intellectual obscenity. And the fact and if they were doing it in the service of some specific cult, like Scientology, or some fringe sect of Christianity, you'd immediately recognize this is a problem. But the fact that the dogmatism that they tacitly support is so well subscribed, and in many cases, in at least in the UK, so apparently benign, it seems too much trouble to oppose it, or impolite to oppose it, or counterproductive to oppose it.
Well, I would love to go on, but we're going to have to stop it there. So
sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.